Is it possible to cast a single spell targeting a single creature and then copy it across all of our creatures to get an explosive victory against our opponent? Because that is the focus of today's video. Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, join me once again as we continue to make our way through the Basically series. For those that don't know, this is a series of decks that I have put together that will not require you to use a single rare or mythic to build. That's right. So without further ado, let us continue to make our super budget brawl decks today with a deck today in mono red, a deck that I'm calling Basically Zada. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So basically Zada today is going to be a mono red build with an average mana curve of about 2.3. You're looking at a total of about 26 creatures in the deck, 16 instants, 12 sorceries, 5 artifacts, 5 enchantments, and 38 lands. If you've been on my channel long enough, you'll definitely know I love 3 things when it comes to Magic. I love being aggro, I love creature decks, and I definitely am a mono red player. And Zada Hedron Grinder is going to be that focus that exemplifies everything I love about building decks. As you can see on the card as I'm talking about him right now, we're trying to focus on getting him onto the battlefield after we have a critical mass of goblins and various other creatures. We're going to use a single instant or sorcery to pump up Zada, and as you can read from his ability, he'll be able to copy that spell across every single creature we have. We will hopefully blow them away with one massive swing. But you may be asking yourself, how is it possible for Zada here to pull off such an explosively powerful game plan without using any rares or mythics?
Good question!
Well, I'm glad you asked. So I think the best way we can do this is let's break down into 3 separate categories our cards and what they're all trying to focus on to get to our victory. First off, let's talk about the main creatures of the deck, which is going to be mostly goblins. Our next category, of course, will be all of the pump that we're going to want to do to make sure we can get the value out of Zada here. And finally, general utility that just helps us round out our whole game plan. Starting with the creatures in the deck and also spells that can make creatures, we'll start off with Cacophony Scamp here. Simply does just some early game damage. If it does end up dying, it'll deal damage equal to its power to any target. Fireblade Charger here also does the same thing. If it ends up dying, it'll also deal damage equal to its power to any target. So we want to get these pumped up with some other stuff. However, cards like Foundry Tree Denizen here will pump itself up anytime another red creature we control enters. Gleeful Demolition here is the same thing as Kadoltha Rebirth here. We mostly want to just deal with destroying one of our own artifacts. Kadoltha here has to sacrifice an artifact to get 3 goblin tokens. However, Gleeful Demolition can also be utilized as a spot removal spell against enemy artifacts. However, if you destroy one of your own, you'll get to course create 3 goblin Phyrexian creature tokens. Goblin Bushwhacker here can be great at any point in the game. Ideally, you want to cast this for the kicker cost, so by paying 2 red mana, once it enters, gives all of our creatures an extra +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. Grease Wrench Goblin here, we want it for the exhaustibility here, where we can then utilize it to then pump 3 extra mana into it to discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards, putting a +1/+1 counter to give it more power. Reckless Lackey here, first strike and haste, and when we don't need it, we can then utilize it to sacrifice to draw a card and create a treasure token for more ramping. Skirk Prospector here, mostly one of our best early game goblins here, because we can sacrifice the goblins we don't need to then generate them into more mana for the game plan. And Torch Courier here is mostly going to be for some of our bigger goblins, where we can sacrifice this at instant speed, giving any one of our target creatures haste until end of turn. Into the 2-drop slot here, we'll have Battlecry Goblin, an amazingly powerful goblin here. With its secondary ability, it gives all of our creatures +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. With Pack Tactics, if we attack with creatures of a power total of 6 or greater, we get to create another 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking.
Neat!
Devoted Duelist here will also ping our opponent for 1 point of damage anytime we cast a second spell on each of our turns. Dragon Fodder here, while it's not an actual creature spell, it still creates for us creature tokens in the form of 2 goblin creature tokens. Enterprise Scallywag here, whenever we descend, we get to create a treasure token. So remember that descend means that anytime a permanent card is put into the graveyard from anywhere. Fisher Wizard here, nothing too fancy, it just enters, we can then discard a card, and if we do, draw a card. Goblin Instigator, similar to some of our other spells here, it enters and creates a token for us for extra value. Kranko's Command here, again, it's a sorcery speed spell, but it creates for us 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. And in the second drop slot to round it out, Wily Goblin. When it enters, create a treasure token for some pseudo ramping. Moving into the 3-drop slot, we'll also have Gem Palm Incinerator here. Ideally, you actually want to cycle this away. When you do, you can deal X amount of damage to target creature, where X is the number of goblins on the battlefield. Our most powerful goblin here is General Karat, the Bolt Bringer here. So this is a goblin soldier, and it's a legendary creature here that says whenever one or more goblins we control attack, we get to create an additional 1/1 red goblin creature token that's also tapped and attacking. Anytime another creature we control enters, even if it's not a goblin, we can also deal 1 damage to each opponent.
That is awesome!
Goblin Matron is going to be our fetch spell here. Once it enters, you can then use it to search out for any goblin card you want and put it into our hand. Goblin Surprise here can either be used as a pump spell to give all of our creatures we control +2/+0 until end of turn, or just use it at instant speed to create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. When we have Reckless Bushwhacker, it also has the Surge ability, has haste as well, and it's also a 2/1. So this Goblin Warrior ally, when it enters, if the Surge cost was paid, other creatures we control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. Keep in mind, however, in order to pay the Surge cost, you have to have made sure you have cast another spell prior to this one. Redcap Thief, similar to Wily Goblin, it enters and creates for us a treasure token. You see a pair of goblins, similar to what we mentioned earlier with Goblin Surprise, it can either be used as pump for the whole team, or you can just use it to make some more goblin tokens. Goblin War Chief here gives all of a cheaper cost to all of our goblin spells by making them 1 less to cast, and gives all of our goblins haste. Hordling Outburst, a little bit more expensive here in the sorcery spot, but for 3 mana, create 3 red goblin creature tokens. Magic Pot here, decent blocking stats, but however, if we want this to die because it helps us create a treasure token. Also, its secondary ability sometimes comes helpful in a pinch if we just need to exile a specific card from a graveyard. Dagger Sail Aeronaut here, when it's our turn, this creature will have flying, so we have at least a couple of evasive flying goblins in the deck. We'll also have lies here, Volley Veteran. When this creature enters, it deals damage equal to target creature based on how many goblins we control. The higher we go, the stronger this card will be as removal. Beetleback Chief here, when it enters, create 2 red goblin creature tokens to add to our power and will help us go wider. Battle Squadron here, this of course also is another one of our flying goblins, however its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures we control, which is great for us because we do want to go as wide as possible. Goblin Rally here rounds out the package here for the remainder of our goblin spells here. It's a 5 mana and it is the most expensive, but of course for that much you get 4 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. In order to make sure we can go wide and go super big with our game plan here, to get that value from Zada, we'll need a bunch of pump spells, specifically ones that target individual creatures. So we have in the top right here, built the Smash here. Target attacking creature will get +3/+3 until end of turn, and if it's an artifact creature, it'll gain trample. We don't care about the trample part, we just want to get, again, a lot of extra pump going across our whole game plan. If we want to make sure that Zada also get value immediately, we'll throw an Expedite here, giving all of our creatures haste until end of turn, and we get to draw a card. Felonious Rage here gives us a little bit of a backup plan because it says target creature will also get +2/+0 and haste until end of turn. However, when this creature dies this turn, we also can leave it behind a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. We'll also utilize here a much more powerful card here, Monstrous Rage. With this one, also we get a +2/+0 pump until end of turn, and we get to put a monster roll token attached to all of our creatures when it goes wide. Reckless Charge here, another one of ours that can also do a lot of heavy damage here. This is probably our strongest one, where it gives our creature +3/+0 and haste until end of turn, and the great part is, even if it does fizzle, we can flash it back for 3 mana. Blazing Crescendo here gets a little bit more expensive, gives our creature +3/+1 for 2 mana until end of turn. However, we can also exile the top card of our library, and until the end of our next turn, we can play that card. One of our more underrated cards will be Fist of Flame here, so for 2 mana at instant speed, we get to draw a card, and until end of turn, target creature will gain trample, and also gets a +1/+0 pump for each card you've drawn this turn. If you can copy this, this gets insane value with how it's designed. Depending on how the board state looks, Invigorated Rampage here can easily be utilized for its secondary ability, giving 2 target creatures +2/+0 and trample until end of turn. You ideally want to target Zada with its singular ability to give 1 target creature +4/+0 and trample until end of turn. And to round out our package here, we'll have Witch's Mark. We can discard a card, and if we do, we get to draw 2 cards. We'll also get to add a Wicked token attached to up to 1 target creature we control. To round out our package here, we'll want to make sure we have a little bit of support. It's mostly going to be a lot of spot removal and card draw for the deck. Implemented Combustion doesn't seem like it does much on its own. However, when it's put into the graveyard for the battlefield, we can draw a card. There's going to be quite a few cards we've noticed in the deck already that want this to get sacrificed. We'll also utilize here Faithless Looting, draw 2 cards, and simply discard 2 cards, and you can use the spell by flashing it back for 3. A Braid here is either going to be Artifact Hate or just spot removal for a single target creature for 3 damage. Same with Cast into the Fire here, you can deal 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures or exile an artifact. Cathartic Pyre here either can be 3 damage to a creature or a planeswalker, or you can discard up to 2 cards to draw that many cards. Demand Answers here, as an additional cost to cast a spell, you have to sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, but then you can draw 2 cards. Impact Tremors here, since we are going to be going wide with a lot of creatures and tokens, this will help us of course just close the gap with the damage. Anytime a creature we control enters, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Kickoff Celebrations here has the Start Your Engines mechanic, which sometimes is situational, but it can be relevant once in a while. When the enchantment enters, just simply discard a card and draw 2 cards. Sacrifice the enchantment once you have max speed to give all of our creatures haste until end of turn. Self-destruct here does look a little bit weird in the deck, but hear me out for a second here. If say like something goes wrong, or maybe we try to pump up some of our creatures and we can't finish them off with all the damage, you can then utilize self-destruct here to give target creature we control X damage to any other target, and then of course it'll damage itself, so it does blow itself up. However, it can be a spectacular way to finish off an opponent. The Flame of Keld here also is going to be a situational card. We have to discard our hand, and then on the second part, draw 2 cards, and the third part allows every one of our red sources we control to deal damage to a permanent or player this turn, dealing that much damage plus an extra 2. This can be a great way again to provide extra power to finish off an opponent. Volcanic Sprite here, same thing with like our other spells, spot removal to a creature, planeswalker, or battle, and then we could put a card from our hand onto the bottom of our library, and if we do, just draw a new card. Collector's Vault here, if we end up in a situation where the board say is maybe like gummed up, this can help us again just churn through our deck by simply drawing a card and discarding a card, and hopefully just helping us with some ramp with treasure tokens. Diamond Mare is one of our few non-goblins in the deck, but hear me out for a second here. Red has a very hard time stabilizing against certain opponents, so having a Diamond Mare and then naming red allows us to gain 1 life for every time we cast a spell of the chosen color. Environmental Science here, same thing, just some small simple ramp. This helps us dig out a basic land and put it into our hand. We can shuffle and then gain 2 life. Ichor Wellspring, similar again to Implemented Combustion, doesn't really do much on its own. However, once we put it into the graveyard for the battlefield, we can also draw a card. Raid Bombardment here, anytime a creature we control with power 2 or less attacks, we can deal 1 damage to each player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. Great for us because a lot of our goblins are a little on the weak side.
He's out of line, but he's right.
But this will help give them a little extra power and pump. We'll have Fast/Furious in the deck to either choose on one side to discard a card and draw 2 cards, or use this as a Wrath here for 5 damage to deal 3 damage to each creature without flying. Goblin Barrage here, also going to be great spot removal for us. We can kick it to sacrifice an artifact or goblin to deal 4 damage to a target creature. If you kick the spell, you can also deal 4 damage to a player or a planeswalker instead. And to round out our package, a single room card here with Painter Studio/Defaced Gallery here. On one side, if you unlock the Painter Studio, you then exile the top 2 cards of our library, and then you can play them at the end of the next turn. Or you can also play Defaced Gallery. For 2 mana, anytime we attack, the attacking creatures will get an extra +1/+0 pump until end of turn. As far as the mana base for our deck, it's going to be as simple as can be because we are a budget deck. We're going to be rocking, of course, 35 mountains, a single demolition field for non-basic land hate, a get through encampment here. Although it enters tapped, we can use it as a creature land in a pinch in most of our more dire situations. And then finally, as long as we have 3 or more mountains out, a Dwarven Mine gives us a free token once it enters the battlefield. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. Now with the deck tech portion out of the way, here's the tips and tricks I can give you to get the value you want out of this deck. In the early part of the game, just start putting out as many creatures as you can. We want to just flood the board with all the goblins we could possibly do. Get as much early game damage in as much as possible to soften up your opponent, so the final blow should be a little bit easier even if your opponent tries to start getting ahead of your game plan. Once you get to the mid part of the game, save a couple of those key pump spells, but of course you want to try to get out at least one of your key creatures that can pump up your whole game plan. We're talking about, again, cards such as your Goblin Bushwhacker here, cards such as your Reckless Bushwhacker, or even if you want to get out your Defaced Gallery. Any of these cards that can give you a little extra pump will go a long way to making it much easier for Zada to get the final blow in. And once Zada hits the battlefield, use one of your pump spells to then activate it onto Zada specifically. Remember that again, the pump spell has to target Zada and only Zada. Once it does, it'll then of course copy it across every single creature you have, so hopefully you will have enough creatures to swing in to get the final strike against your opponent. Don't be afraid to be aggressive with your card draw in this deck. And the final thing I do want to remind you is any spell that you do manage to then cast onto Zada that will get copied across the way, every ability that card may have will also be copied as well. So one of some of the biggest powerful spells that you can do on Zada will be cards like Fist of Flame, because that will also trigger off the card draw that you'll get across every single copy, as well as the extra pump, which will also trigger off with every single copy. So be mindful of how you sequence the spells that you want to cast on Zada. Sounds easy, right?
Correct!
Well, on some of those off chances where maybe we stumble a little bit, this is why we have, again, a couple of extra backup options for us. As I mentioned earlier, cards such as your Impact Tremors, your General Karat, or your Raid Bombardment, again, will help close the gap, even if Zada kind of struggles to stay on the battlefield. This leads us to one of the first key advantages our deck has, and that is, of course, the fact that we can go very wide, very quickly, sometimes out of nowhere. We have more than enough 1-drops to flood the board very quickly, and we have a couple of key 2-drops that can either make us go wide with extra tokens, or sometimes a couple of key creatures, as I mentioned earlier, that can help us just create more Goblin creature tokens. Cards such as Battlecry Goblin and General Karat, of course, are the key ones that are going to help make sure your game plan stays in motion. And because of the fact that we can go wide, this leads us to the next major advantage our deck has. We're highly resistant to spot removal. Yes, when it comes to a singleton format, you usually don't encounter it too much, but sometimes 1 or 2 key creatures that some other decks may have want to keep them on a battlefield to the point where they will do everything they can to protect that one key creature. So sometimes their game plans will fall apart once they get that creature removed. Our deck, not so much. Do we want Zada on the battlefield? Ideally, yes. But as you see, since we're going wide, most opponents are going to have to pack something a little bit beefier than maybe just a couple of quick, fatal pushes, or maybe just, again, a Heartless Act just to kind of get rid of our stuff. We'll have more than enough goblins to keep throwing at our opponent, sometimes recklessly, just until they just cannot handle the overwhelming red wave we're about to toss at them. And to this will lead us to the final major advantage our deck has. Despite the fact that we want to rely on Zada to get our win very easily, our deck is actually a very flexible aggro deck. And what I mean by that is something that I've already reiterated, but the fact that even if you cannot maintain Zada on the battlefield, you have a lot of good support options that'll ensure that we can still keep pushing through damage. Remember that again, some of your cards that we mentioned earlier, cards like you see a pair of goblins, while they can help us create tokens at instant speed, remember these are also pump spells, which will give your creatures an extra pump until end of turn to the whole team. So even if we cannot single target Zada, you have plenty of these options to make sure you can keep applying pressure to your opponent. Other cards that will help you out with this plan, such as the Flame of Keld. Once you dump out your whole hand, you'll be able to refuel with a couple of cards, and that puts a major clock on your opponent once you can activate its final ability. Other cards such as Painter Studio, as I mentioned earlier, every time you attack will also give you a little bit of pump here and there. And you do have a couple of big creatures in the deck that will keep getting bigger, cards such as your Battle Squadron, which are capable of providing a lot of extra power once you can get that into the air. And it's going to be a little bit hard to deal with that. Or even some of your smaller cards, such as your Foundry Street Denizen, will get a lot of extra pump every time a red creature will enter the battlefield. But just like I do with every other deck type, I do want to, of course, address for you the key weaknesses that you need to be aware of if you do want to play a deck like this. And the first major disadvantage, of course, is we are completely weak to Wraths. So if your opponent can keep blowing up the whole board, waiting for us to get a critical mass of creatures and timing it right, then it's going to be a really sad deck, especially because there's really not that many ways of rebuilding all those goblins we worked so hard to throw onto the battlefield. And this will lead us to the next major disadvantage our deck has, and that is we're very weak against control decks and any deck that can provide life gain to stabilize. Because we are a very aggressive deck, we want to keep applying pressure by putting up more and more damage, but our creatures don't do a lot of heavy damage. So if your opponent can stabilize with cards to help them gain life, or maybe force us to pay attacks in order to swing, or just punish us for even drawing cards or just doing things our deck wants to do, then our deck is going to struggle because we don't have too much mana to spare when we want to just keep dumping our hand full of all the spells that we want to cast. And this, of course, will lead us to the final major disadvantage our deck has. It's not a huge one, but sometimes you do run into this style of deck, and that's mostly going to be decks that are very enchantment heavy. We have no answers in mono red to deal with enchantments. Well, technically we have a couple of maybe, colorless options, but that's not the point of this deck. So this deck is going to be really hopeful to just have a good matchup against mostly decks that are, again, creature heavy, artifact heavy, because we can deal with those. But decks that, of course, are going to have bigger creatures, or any deck that has a lot of enchantments to then maintain control of the board, are going to give us a really hard time, because we, again, just literally have in this deck no answers for that. And the small amounts of damage we can try to accumulate on our opponent can get washed away very quickly once they can stabilize. Now, if you did like today's deck overall, and you're still interested in seeing what else you can do with mono red or creature decks in general, as always, I will show you on screen right now a couple of quick snapshots of previous decks we have done throughout the course of this channel. If you have not already noticed, those links have been scattered throughout the course of this video, so help me out and support the channel by clicking on any one of those videos to see what else you can do with goblins, mono red, or just aggro in general. And with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give you on this deck. When it comes to Zada and the game plan he has, it's a very simple but highly effective strategy, and you saw today how well it could be executed without having to do too much setup. To be honest, I actually have a lot more fun with simple decks like this, where it just kind of gives off one easy to understand game plan, and once it's executed, it is hilarious when it manages to go off. Sometimes keeping it simple is the best solution. So to put this another way, if you're a fan of creature decks, if you're a fan of aggro strategies, and if you're a fan of combat tricks where you can sometimes just win out of nowhere with just a couple of quick instant and sorcery spells, then I would definitely say, give this deck a try, and I assure you, when you manage to copy a bunch of your pump spells across all of your creatures, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so, and you'll be very surprised at how you can pull it off on today's budget. I assure you, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!